topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I am your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, and I have been with passion and pride bringing you this podcast since February of 2015. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I am an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. And my team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations and increase profitability by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose. Our mission is to help our clients create a destination workplace where people flock to join, are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission, which then translates to your higher profits. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com and my personal site, elisecortez.com. Now, getting back in today's program, with us again is Faisal Hoque, an accomplished entrepreneur, senior executive, author, thought leader, public speaker, and advisor to management teams and boards of directors with more than 25 years of cross-industry success. He's the founder of Shadoka, Next Chapter, and other companies. They all focus on enabling sustainable and transformational changes. As a thought leader, he has authored a number of books on leadership, innovation, mindfulness, resilience, organizational transformation, and entrepreneurship, including Everything Connects: How to Transform and Lead in the Age of Creativity, Innovation, and Sustainability. His work has appeared in Fast Company, Business Insider, Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Fox, CBS, Financial Times, Mergers and Acquisitions, Forbes, etc. Today, he joins us from Connecticut. Faisal, a hearty welcome back to Working on Purpose.
Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful. And as we know, my friend, when you came back and I saw that you had this book out, Everything Connects, and one of your people had sent it to me, and I realized we hadn't yet featured it, I said, you must come back, young man. You must come back. So thank you.
Thank you. Honored. Thank you.
You're welcome. And as I mentioned before we got on air, this show has been on air for 9 years. And so what we tend to do is curate the content. What I mean by that is if we've already covered it, I don't go over the things that have already been covered. I like to pull out the nuggets that I really think, enliven and add to what we've covered. And so what I want to do in our time together today is pull out those pieces that I thought were really quite delicious and different than what we've covered. And I already told you that I love your definition of entrepreneur. And as I recall it, it's the person who takes responsibility for their economic lives and well-being. And that's a title that I have grown into over the years, Faisal, and I love the way that you have defined that for us. So let's all welcome, the entrepreneurs and wannabe entrepreneurs who are listening and watching today. Welcome, entrepreneurs, and those who want to innovate. So the first thing I want to talk about here, which I think is amazing that we need to talk about it, is you talk about in this latest book, the need to humanize our work lives. It is so true. We do still. And this book came out, what was it? 2012 originally. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's been now 8 years, and feels like that message is more relevant today than when I actually sat and wrote that thing. And the outline, you were talking about traveling. I actually wrote the outline of that book literally sitting in Dubai airport. And then the book came out, about a year later. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I think it's really, really interesting. And I am a person. So for my PhD studies, I studied human development, and we did a lot of work around systems. So I like to think in systems. And to me, this idea everything connects really speaks to systems and interconnectivity, and nothing exists on its own, which of course I celebrated. I love how you talk about, first thing in the book, you borrow a line from Phil Libin, the highly portable CEO of Evernote. And you talk about, of course, humanizing our working lives is a sufficiently epic quest to dedicate our lives to. Well, that's what I'm doing for sure. And probably you are too, to a certain extent. But I appreciate how this idea that humanization will yield more positive experiences at work, more creativity and innovation within organizations, and greater interpersonal bonds between the people we work with. And of course, this also means that we're creating more value long term. So that's where I want to start if we can, Faisal. If you can kind of just comment on that, speak to that, that's where I want to begin our conversation.
Look, I mean, maybe I can start with the definition of entrepreneurship because, in reality, almost every one of us has some sort of entrepreneurial trait that allows us to survive, right? Because if you think about a very early stage when you're trying to find a job or when you're trying to make a living, and depending on where you're born and where your the circumstances around you, that makes you do certain things, and you are very much focused on survival and making a living that allows you to put food on the table. As you grow and as you progress and as you learn, if your motivation and your idea of success maybe changes, and most successful people, as they go through different stages of life, like if you look at my life, I can talk from my own perspective. Initially, when first I came to US, I wanted to just survive because I had to put food on the table and put myself to school. So I had to be very creative to do that, right? So that's the creativity and way of surviving is very much fundamental for an entrepreneur. Now, if you go fast forward, and now I'm in my 50s, I've gone through several stages of my life. I've got a little more credibility, a little more knowledge. I can do things more effectively than when I was in my 20s. My motivation is very different, same as what you're saying, that this idea of making an impact and caring for others because you can afford to do that. Once your basic, it's like Maslow's hierarchy. Once your basic needs are met, then you look for something bigger than you. So the definition of entrepreneurship and impact and this pursuit of whatever that you want to do changes over time. So whether it's Phil's definition of looking for that's meaningful, or whether my definition from my own life journey, what's important to me, we have tremendous opportunity to craft and change it as we grow. So I thrive on that idea that you actually can learn and grow and change.
Me too. And I, of course, am a big Maslow fan as well. And yes, when you want to, as an entrepreneur, of course, a big reason that I'm an entrepreneur is that, yes, I do want to be able to be responsible for my own time and my economic well-being. And I want to express my purpose through the work that I do. And that is what I get to do. But that takes us to this next place here. There's two parts to where I want to take us next. And one is, I like how you talk about the entrepreneur as idealistic and pragmatic, sensitive to the world they wish to see, and conscious of the world as it is. The entrepreneur's work then is connecting these two. That's exactly what, has been kind of my riveting challenge and focus of late. I've been, an entrepreneur since 2003, and more specifically living my purpose since 2018. So that is definitely my space. But taking it more specifically, where it gets really more interesting to call on more deeply your area of expertise, especially as it relates to innovation, Faisal, I wanted to take it further, where you then go on, you talk about Christensen's work and talking about how instead of just looking at what's the market today, what are people wanting today, what can I give them today that they want, they already know that they want, what can I actually create that it actually speaks to their unspoken, unmet future needs. That's where I'm also at. And I'll share more about that in just a second. But if you could speak to how that really disrupts things and what does it take to be able to live in that space?
Right. Look, I mean, the innovation journey or this whole notion of being idealistic and pragmatist at the same time is very crucial and fundamental in the sense that, most of the entrepreneurs or innovators are dreamers, right? They want to see the
Yeah.
world in a different lens
Yeah.
than most people does, right? And as a result, you take a lot of risk, but you also sometimes fall in love with your own creation, whereby the market may not be ready for what you're preaching or whatever you're producing, right? But the successful ones somehow manage to balance this idealistic view where world needs to be and what you can produce and create that demand, because a lot of time, as I said, as you just mentioned, that people doesn't know. I mean, you can look at every single innovation, whether that's Steve's Apple
Right.
and iPhone, or whether it's the new generation of cars, whatever the case may be, right? It didn't exist. We created the need for it. They created the need for it, and now we can live without it. But if you look at the journey, we forget how many times they failed in order to pursue that journey, right? I mean, the history of iPhone, I mean, it's almost like 15 years old, because it didn't start as an iPhone. It started as the iPad, and then it morphed into the iPhone. And I don't, I mean, those of who are in our 50s remember that was a brick-like device that
I
nobody wanted
do.
to use, right?
Mhm.
So it is that, so the pragmatism is so that you can actually maintain that economic sustainability to survive, right? And idealism is that having that dream to do something that's different and creative, whatever, but it takes time to get there. And the longer you stay with it, the chances of success becomes higher, right? So it's a fine balance, and some of us are luckier than others in the sense that sometimes we come up with something and it becomes an instant hit. Sometimes, you have to work at it for many years. I mean, it's funny. I was flipping through my very first book that I published in 2000 called E-Enterprise with Cambridge University Press. And in that book, this was right around the internet bubble, and I had an internet company, obviously, at that time. And I was arguing in the book that it's not the technology, it's how we learn to use it and come up with the business model that will make this new generation product successful, that are very much going to be digital. I look at that, what I wrote 25 years ago, and I heavily quoted Peter Drucker's principle and other
Yes,
things in that book.
you would have. Yeah.
And I look at now, yeah, and then and now last year when I was kind of writing a fresher version of this in my other book called Reinvent, a lot of things have changed. Technology has changed, and we're about to like completely disrupt the world with AI. But fundamentals haven't changed. Like some of the things we're talking about, this mindset and looking at things in certain ways, and ability to survive, and the ability to pragmatically balance and so that we can actually do the things we want to do and have the patience, to do that. Is a trick. And later on, I'll add something to this. But that's really the case. I mean, you have to have the idealism and vision and the dream, but you also have to be pragmatic. What works when, and how much work it will take to get where you want to get it there.
Well, just quickly, you mentioned Maslow before. I mean, I'm already helping companies to activate meaning and purpose in their leadership and their culture. But really,
Yeah.
where I want to go next is, you mentioned Maslow. He has a higher attitudinal B value spectrum,
Yeah.
and I am out now to develop programs that help people to live in that space of those higher values, because it lends to creativity, it lends to pro-social behaviors, et cetera. So that's where I'm going next, even though nobody's saying, would you please do this for me? That I can think of, there's nobody saying, I'd like to buy this from you today, but I need to do it.
Sure.
So anyway, so now where I want to go next, Faisal, is this is just such a brilliant way to talk about management. And it's one of my big things, because I teach a lot of managers through my programs, and I teach a lot of leaders. And I hate the idea of managing by presence. I hate the idea of butt in seat management. It's so anti-human. And so your idea of managing by consciousness is an idea whose time has come. Please, would you say a little bit more about what you mean by that? And then I want to delve a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, look, most of the time, when especially in the field of innovation and creativity and that sort of a thing, we often enough put timeline, and we manage by what was the output and what time frame it was done, how many hours somebody's putting into it, et cetera, et cetera, right? In a complex creative environment, that doesn't really work because the reason it doesn't work is, and we all know, if you look at individual level, not at an organizational level, and we'll connect the dot between individual and organization in a minute. We all have specific biorhythm. We all have specific creative burst. We all have a particular driver for creativity. Some people get motivated by music. Some people get motivated by walking the nature, whatever, or talking to other people, whatever the case may be. So if you put time frame and you start putting people in this box that did you put 8 hours and did you work 5 days a week or when did you show up at the office at 9 in the morning? Those things really doesn't is not the activator for creativity. For example, I work best in the early part of the morning, meaning creative work, right? So between 4:30, 5 o'clock until 9, I'm very creative. After that, it's my productivity starts getting, lower and lower. And so if somebody says you got to come here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you have to have 3 o'clock, you start writing your next white paper, that's probably not going to work, right? So this we mean by managing consciousness, meaning they're very mindful of how people, tick in their own way so that they can give their maximum creative output. As a result, you actually get there faster. And then add on to that, the ownership, both economically and otherwise. There's a huge argument when people have ownership meaning physical economic ownership in a company versus you're just a plain employee. Those all has impact, right? That's monetary ownership, but there's also other kind of ownership. When you put responsibility and accountability on people and tell them come up with something that's off their own and they get rewarded for that, that's where the creative process really starts, taking hold. So, being conscious about how each person gets motivated and produce and able to adjust and motivate them to live their fullest potential is how you then translate into that organizational system, because that has to be part of the culture. It's not just cuddling to one person. It's like catering to the entire organization to be that way. So collectively they produce what they need to produce. Doesn't mean you don't hold people accountable. Doesn't mean that you don't manage by numbers, because at the end of the day, if you're talking about a company, they really have to produce results from a financial point of view. Otherwise, they will go out of business.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, Faisal. Thank you for bringing that to life so eloquently. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Faisal Hoque. He's an accomplished entrepreneur, senior executive, author, thought leader, public speaker, and advisor to management teams and board of directors with more than 25 years of cross-industry success. He's the founder of Shadoka, Next Chapter, and other companies which all focus on enabling sustainable and transformational changes. We've been talking a bit about some of the areas around humanizing work and also managing by consciousness. After the break, we're going to get into the relationship between an organization's structure and how it actually innovates. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. Like Faisal, as I'm also dedicated to helping create a world where people can realize their potential at work and are led by inspirational leaders who bring them to their best, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my books, and the latest one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote the book to really help readers, business leaders, and company owners to understand the new lay of the land of what the workforce wants, and then to provide 22 best practices that help you steward your culture to get there. So you can find it at my site, elisecortez.com, or Amazon. If you are just joining us, my guest is Faisal Hoque. He is the author of Everything Connects: Cultivating Mindfulness, Creativity, and Innovation for Long-Term Value, one of his many works, which we're talking about today. So where I wanted to go next, which I think is really, really interesting, and you really got me thinking about this, Faisal, for my own company, is I quote from your book. You say, any organization that designs a system will inevitably produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So in other words, how we can restate that, as you used Conway's law what they're saying is companies are destined to produce products that mirror their organizational structure, or even more extremely, poetically, we could simply say that the organization implies that product, or that the organization is the product. That is so interesting. And I look at that and I went, "Ooh, how would I characterize how we communicate around here?" Oops.
Well, this has a very deep philosophical tenet for me, because if you think about a Buddhist teaching, it says that you are who you think you are, right? And so it's kind of like that. When you put that in a greater context, a leader is the face of the organization, but the leader also kind of crafts what that organization is. And often enough, when you look at the organizational structure, obviously you have to have systems, especially the larger you are, the more you need systems. But the way you structure the organization and how much rigidity you have in the organization kind of reflects the leader's personality and mindset and the philosophy, how that leaders wants to produce, communicate, and drive people's output, right? So it really comes from that. And so in the book, as you read thoroughly, so much appreciated. We kind of craft this notion that you have to look at, if you look at the organizational structure from the eyes of innovation and creativity, you can look at people and say, okay, who are the people who are creating ideas? Who are the people who are building those ideas? Who are the people building partners around those ideas? And who are the people who are focusing how we can improve? And then craft the organization in that context. And by the way, you have to rotate those people so there is a cross-pollination or cross-learning, versus saying, here's my marketing, here's my sales, and here's this, and here's that. And that's how you start creating those silos that doesn't overlap, right? So because you're not thinking from the that life cycle of a new innovation, where it starts with idea to go to market to value realization.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And speaking of that, I did think there was merit for our listeners and viewers to talk about the 4 roles in performing innovation that you really lay out so beautifully in your book, because they're all needed, right? All 4 of them are needed. And I think it makes sense for us to discuss them briefly, describe them and what it is that they do, because some people might say, oh, I totally love this kind of a role, or I might want to try to learn this role. So could you talk about the 4 roles?
Yeah, so there's the ideation role, people who actually creates the idea, and they look at opportunities, and they look at the core competencies in the organization, and then they come up with an idea. Second one is the people who are really looking at building those ideas in terms of designing and implementing so that you can take a output to the market. And when I'm saying this, I'm not talking about just physical product. It could be a service. It could be all kind of things. But nevertheless, you have to craft that in a consumable manner that your customer can take it. So, for example, we could write a book, which is a product, and we had to think about it. Came up with the idea of the book. You had to design what's going to be the structure and so on and so forth, right? So once you do that, then there's this idea of, as I wrote this 12 years ago, so it evolved a little bit from that. Now I like to say that there is a role of partnering who creates ecosystems so that that product or service can survive, who goes out there and creates this vehicle whereby people get to know about your offering, people get to support their offering, influence your offering, helps adapting that offering in your customer base, etc., etc. While you're doing that, there's a very important role that we often forget is the improving role that allows taking a step back and looking at that ideation to market to value realization and say, where can we improve? Because as you're doing this, especially in a new offering, what happens is that you're going to learn things that you haven't thought through, the reactions the customer is going to have, the way you decided to distribute, the way you priced it. These are all places for improvement. So those improving role has a different a role than the people who are coming up with new ideas, because they're looking at how can we improve it so it does get better and it does get more acceptance and it does generate more revenue and profit margin, which is ultimately the reason of surviving a product or service. And by the way, that also includes what impact it's having on a societal level, because the higher you can move a social impact, the more personal and more sticky the product becomes, because the audience creates the emotional connection to your offering.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Faisal. Listeners and viewers, what I want to emphasize about why I brought this up for you, I always want you to be able to take away something immediately from my program to put to work immediately in your business. And so think about those 4 roles: the ideation role, the guiding role, the building role, and the improving role. Think about how you can layer that structure into your team today, especially if you want to encourage innovation. So really, you could I know so many organizations whose teams are definitely not structured that way. So put that to work. Okay, so the next thing, before I cue this up here, Faisal, if you could just indulge me here and remind me and the listeners and viewers of your basic education. How are you schooled?
I'm schooled from the street, literally. I did go to school for my undergrad in Southern Illinois University for electrical engineering, and then I went to University of Minnesota for computer science and management science. But in my 5th year of school, I came up with a product, and I dropped out of college and sent out a disk to get my first, a floppy disk, literally a floppy disk in a demo, and got my first job. But since then, I've been an entrepreneur, and my learning is actually from reading all these people you mentioned. Whether it's some of them I met in real life, sometimes some of them I have never met, like whether it's Peter Drucker or Clay Christensen or even Buddhist teaching. And also from my customers, I have had a tremendous opportunity to work with some of the best and the brightest in the industry, both in private sector and public sector. So I worked with GE. My first or second company was acquired by GE, so I worked there for a while. But whether it's GE, whether it's IBM, Amex, et cetera, et cetera. But also, last 6-7 years, I'm doing a ton of work for our government, both for our Department of Defense and the Homeland Security. So I had a different kind of learning experience in the last 7-8 years, where motivation is not profit; it's literally human lives and national security and other things. So the innovation and surviving and creativity, motivating people has a totally different construct than a commercial organization.
Thank you for that. That was really so beautiful and really filled in so much for me. And the reason I wanted to situate your education, Faisal, is where I want to go next is I want to talk about love and joy in the workplace, which doesn't usually fit with electrical engineering and, sort of, even creating, an entrepreneurial company. It does, I think, when it comes to people's lives, et cetera. But, as an organizational psychologist, of course, I understand how important this stuff is. So hearing it from your perspective is really, really valuable. So I really appreciate that you do cite Barbara Fredrickson's work in your book as well. But let's talk about this idea of the role of love and joy in the workplace, especially as it relates to innovation.
Look, I mean, anything positive, anything, that has meaning, deep meaning, and any type of deep work, that doesn't come from chasing something superficially. And often enough, if you look at the greatest entrepreneurial journey, they are personal stories that created the spark of doing something different and doing something innovative. So in my case, what has happened, Elise, is that various stages of my life, I had different motivation and different sorts of love, if you want to code it as love. So at some stage, it was love of creating something different and new and being successful. At some stage, it was the love of taking care of my family. At some stage, making an impact for the society, and recently, it has been combination of doing something that has a long-lasting impact for the next generation, but also serving my country. So the work I do today, it is solely based on how can I serve my country, number one, and number two, can I do something that will help a certain cause that I have. In specifically these days is cancer research, because I have a cancer surviving child. So my motivation and what I do today is completely different than the 90s and 2000 tech entrepreneur who's chasing to be yet another tech entrepreneur that wants to take the horn by the bull, as they say. Those are long gone. It's a totally different definition. So each of these stages are driven by love, and each of these stages are driven by a joy that you get by doing the work. I don't consider my work as work. I consider that it's a fulfillment of giving, if I can use that term. And I don't think I'm truly content by what I do. I mean, I can say that, and I'm very able to say exactly that. And if you don't do that, but let's rephrase it separately. If you manage to do that, the output you're going to get out of the work you do is unmatched to the work that you do when you are just slugging it away, right, to survive, right? And you have to somehow get to that point.
Thank you for that. And I did not know about your child, so this really, it makes even more sense. Thank you for sharing that, Faisal. That is really remarkable and beautiful.
Thank you.
I want to also bring back the pragmatic application of the work and joy for those who are still out there thinking this might still feel a little touchy-feely. And that is that you go on to your book to really talk about how when we factor in things and we work from a place of love and joy, that it helps us to relax our inborn and unseen mental rigidity and to expand our perspective of a situation beyond the cocoon of my view. This is how I think of things, into something more aerial, more aware of the group as a whole, including that of the customer or user or the unseen partner to any workplace conversation. So, it just kind of expands our capacity to connect the dots, if you will. And then, as I say, it helps us be able to practice what are called pro-social behaviors.
Yep.
So that part of what it does. And so then if we take it a step further and go into just, positive emotions in general, which of course, all of my work is servicing that. I just appreciate that you're really also talking about what that does for people's mindset who are intentionally putting themselves into or, channeling positive emotions, whether they do it because they've been asked or because it's in the environment they work from, just that ability to be able to start to be able to work from the place of love, joy, empathy that allows people to have a wider inventory of possible actions. And then they take that broader context necessary for systems thinking and promote that resilience. And that's what I wanted to celebrate when you were talking about love, joy, positive emotions in the workplace, especially as it relates to innovation.
Look, I mean, when you go to ultimately, innovation is not a solo sport. You can't innovate something and make it sustained and actually adapted if you're not working with people, right? So you can take a commercial product, or you can look at a complex environment like our federal government, right? It doesn't matter what sector, or look at cancer research, right? So it doesn't matter what area of expertise or field or you work with, you can go with their good intention, but ultimately you have to expand that in an ecosystem, right? So this is where that love and joy becomes critical, because these are hard work. Convincing other people of your idea and motivating other people of your cause is hard work, right? Because everybody has their own thing going on, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is where empathy and and a conscious effort of connecting with other people becomes critical, because you have to go to where they are and bring your idea to them. Now, this is my idea, just make it happen. That just doesn't work that way, right? You have to show what's in it for them, and you have to convince them why they should care about things, and you should be able to articulate why it matters in a greater context, right? So if it's a company, it matters because if you create a good product or service, then your customer will buy it, and as a result, the company will be successful. If you do it in the context of, let's say, in public sector, you're trying to serve public goods. If it's good for the society, ultimately it'll be good for you, but it's also going to be good for your children. So you do your part, and as a result, you bring it together. So that, positivity and gratitude and empathy is contagious, as we all know. Once you go there with that positive attitude, it attracts people to rally behind you. But the trick is taking that and create a system and a culture that can be replicated above and beyond your presence, right?
Yes.
So this is the role of the leader, whereby the leaders doesn't create followers, they create system. There's that saying, leaders create other leaders. I actually like to say, leader creates system and process that becomes the cultural DNA that allows other people to carry the water above and beyond you, right? So if you can't do that, then you become that sustainable organization, and it doesn't matter who's there and who's not there. The next generation will take it over and do it.
So beautiful, Faisal. Okay, let's grab our last break, and then I'll let our listeners and viewers chew a little bit on what you were talking about with love and joy, positive emotions, and how sprinkling them into your organizational culture can actually promote innovation. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Faisal Hoque. He's an accomplished entrepreneur, senior executive, author, thought leader, public speaker, and advisor to management teams and board of directors with more than 25 years of cross-industry experience. He is the founder of Shadoka, Next Chapter, and many other companies, which all focus on enabling sustainable and transformational changes. We're going to talk more after the break about this wonderful notion of sentience and how you as a manager and leader can embrace that to bring out the best in your people. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I am your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As I mentioned in our first break, I just put out my last book, The Great Revitalization, in March of 2023. What I did for you to help utilize the contents of that book without even reading it is I created a 3-page assessment you can print off my website from gusto-now.com to determine the extent to which your workforce, your culture today is actually set up to meet the discerning needs of today's workforce. It will also help give you a roadmap to elevating your organizational culture to meet that discerning standard. So it's at gusto-now.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Faisal Hoque. He is the author of Everything Connects, Cultivating Mindfulness, Creativity, and Innovation for Long-Term Value, one of his many works. So where I wanted to go next, Faisal, is I love words and I love speaking different languages and words. And you talk about this wonderful word called sentience in your work here when it comes to really celebrating individuals and managing and stewarding and nurturing them. So let's talk about sentience.
Sure. That word, if you typed it on AI or if you typed it on Google, it will tell you that is the capacity to be very conscious and self-aware, and the capacity to be self-aware what's around you and what other people feels and does, meaning your ecosystem, if you want to get it to a very broader extent. So if you look at a leader, a successful leader, they truly are sentient. The more successful they are, the more self-conscious they are more conscious about how other people feel, but also how you feel, because how you feel comes across the way you speak, your body language, your reactions, etc., right? So that's really the meaning of sentience. So if you now look at a successful leader doesn't create chaos. Successful leader does not create an environment where people runs around with like a chicken with their head cut out, right? Successful leaders are the persona of calmness who is, very much aware of whatever the chaos that organization is feeling, but also how to calm that process so that you can move things forward, right? So it's a conscious leadership versus, the classic command and control leadership that says, hey, I said so, therefore you make it so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we probably talked about this, but I have long been a conscious capitalist, and I do serve on the board here in Dallas as well. I very much promote those principles. And taking it just a little bit further here, this idea of sentience, I want to just to reinforce what you said so beautifully in your book. You say it also entails appreciating the interior complexity of the people you work with. Then by appreciating that complexity, you can make explicit the links between a person's individual motivations and that of the organization, creating an alignment and alliance between the individual that comprises the organization. And that's back to Everything Connects, right? How can you actually see that in such a way that you can actually work to connect it? I think that is such a beautiful and elegant contribution of a manager and leader to be able to develop the capacity to do that.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you know this, at least from most successful organization, and their leaders don't have like 30 direct reports. They have 4 or 5, because what you just said, what you just read from my excerpt from my book, if you look at that, it takes a lot of interpersonal relationship and nurturing the relationship to get to the point where you'd really understand somebody else's inner complexity and whatever else is going on in their lives, right? Because whatever else going on in their lives is a direct reflection how they perform at work, right? So if you're not aware of it, you don't have to like get into their lives, but you have to be you have to have an empathy to recognize that whatever is going on and however they express their creativity both positively and negatively. So if you look at that context, every leader can only do that with a handful of people, right? That's why organization, larger the organization is, it's a hierarchy, right? And it's not a bad thing, because hierarchy, you can look at hierarchy as a coach or a guide that giving guidance versus commands. and the guidance comes from what needs to be done, but also the capacity and the capability of the people that you're guiding to be the best performers they can be, right? By holding them accountable, right? So in that context, the best performance, especially in the context of innovation and creativity, and by the way, those are the only jobs, that will be remaining, as time goes by, because repetitive, mundane work would be replaced with a lot of technology, aka AI and other things. Even in the knowledge space, you'll see that it's continuously being replaced with technology that are mundane, that's repetitive, right? So the only set of work that will be remain is this creative set of work and driven by creative people. So the management and the leadership also has to go back to that, to what we just discussed moments ago. And by the way, when I wrote that book, technology was not even that advanced. And if you look at what has happened in the last 2 years, it's taken to the whole new different level, right? So, and it's yet a tsunami is about to come.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I want to really help, like you, along your side, steward it. And to that end, where I kind of want to go next, and this will probably take us close to the very end of the show, is listeners and viewers, if you are an individual contributor, I want you to think about the extent to which you experience work like this. If you are a leader of people, I want you to think about the extent to which your people experience their work like this. I am a person who believes profoundly in the promise of work to be able to help us realize our potential. So I love what Faisal has in his book here. He's talking about Apple, whatever your view is about Apple, but he's got an excerpt in here from a memo that Apple gives to new hires, in which the company contrasts work and life's work. And it reads, I quote, "People don't come here to play it safe." The memo printed in the New York Times reads, "They come here to swim in the deep end. They want their work to add up to something that couldn't happen anywhere else." Think about that. That's you joining in, opting into sentience at its finest, and really thinking about how can you give yourself over so you give the greatest aspect of yourself, contribute it to something much bigger and grander than yourself. I think most people want something, some form of this, and are hungry for it. And so I really wanted to celebrate that, Faisal. If you want to just comment on that, or if you have a perspective on that.
Absolutely. It depends. It applies in any field. So you look at the doctors and nurses, right? If you look at their credo, they're not there to create products. They're there to save lives, right? So they have a different credo. Now, when I look at my brothers and sisters in their uniform, in our military, they're there to protect our country. Yes. They're there to uphold democracy. They're there to make sure hungry are getting fed. People who are, are in dire calamity situation are getting saved, right? So their code of ethics and code of conduct and their calling is different. But each one of those areas, whether it's an Apple employee or whether it's a doctor or whether it's, I look at the doctors of, my son's doctor. He wouldn't be alive if I didn't have those dedicated nurse, researcher doctors that are working night and day to come up with a cure that could save patients like him. I can say the same thing about my friends and coworkers in the military community, right? So each one of these people or group of people, they have different calling, but it is their life work. It is their life work that dedicating to create something different and a better place and a safer place for all of us, right? So it doesn't has to be for just commercial call. It applies for anything and everything that we all do.
Absolutely. And I want to just finish by celebrating and let you comment on this just quickly. As you talk about the role of the CEO, and you mentioned Mehta, who's a serial entrepreneur, and he says his number one job is to make sure everyone is operating at their absolute potential. And that he says that everyone, and his job is to make sure everyone is incredibly passionate about what they do. That is what I'm stewarding among leaders as well. And just to finish it, if you could just say in 20 seconds, how would you like to comment on that and finish the show?
I think, that's exactly what a sentience means, because you have to be able to nurture other people's potential. It's not about telling them what to do. It's getting the best out of them so they can lead what they want to lead, right? So that's the highest potential of a leader and a teacher.
Faisal, I really enjoy having you in my life, learning from you, sharing with my listeners and viewers around the world. Thank you for coming back to Working on Purpose.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely honored.
Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to find more out about this man and the work that he does, the work and the books that he produces, and his various companies, Shadoka, Next Chapter, etc. So just start by going to his personal website. It's Faisal Hoque. Let me spell that for you. Faisal, Faisal, Hoque, Hoque, FaisalHoque.com. Start there. If you missed the show last week, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Darren Tully talking about his book, Live Your Possible, Ignite Your Happy, Authentic Self, and Live a Fulfilling Life Rooted in Joy, Inclusion, Love, and Possibilities. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Next week, we'll be on the air with Tim Vandehay talking about his book that he co-authored called Swipe, The Science Behind Why We Don't Finish What We Start. See you there. And remember that work is one of the best means and adventures of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's continue to find a way to work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.